Hey guys, what's up? Today I'm taking a drive in a very, I dare say, iconic car. This is a car that's been hugely popular all across the automotive market. I'm talking today about the Acura TSX. When I say TSX, I'm talking about the original TSX. That means it's the first gen that debuted in 2004, 2005, all the way through 2008. In 2009, they redesigned it. It became a little bit more grown-up-ish looking. But the first gen was actually a little bit sportier. It had a very aerodynamic shape, very sporty shape. And to be honest, it pretty much looked exactly like the TL of that particular generation. And that was, in my opinion, the best TL that was ever made was from 2004 through 2008 when they completely redesigned that car. It's a great driving car. It's a great handling car, surprisingly, for a four-door. If you recall, I did a video on the RSX, which essentially was a shrunken down version of this car, a little different skin on the outside in terms of the way it looked, but the bones of it were very similar. It had the more or less the same engine, the 2.4 liter engine, sort of same stance. This car sits pretty nice and low to the ground. Transmission wise, 5-speed automatic. You could get this with a manual 6-speed as well, which I think was a little bit more spirited, and I think that's why it actually has such a great following, because if you think about saloon cars being cars that have 4 doors and are fun to drive, you put a 6-speed in a car like this and you pretty much have got that same recipe. The 4-cylinder engine in this car develops about 201 horsepower. Red line is 7,000. If you're familiar with the evolution of the 4-cylinder engine, you know, 7,000 RPM red lines were very synonymous with anything that had any level of performance to it. Once you get this thing spun up in the RPMs, it really comes on. It has an automatic, but surprisingly, the 5-speed in this car is very capable. It's very smooth. You know, when I realized that this was just the 5-speed, I thought, oh, the gearing is probably going to be so tall, it's not going to effectively manage the engine. I couldn't be more wrong. This 5-speed is very, very well mated to this car. It actually goes through the gears well. It has the manual mode in it, though you don't have paddle shifters. You can still do a really good job of getting the most out of this engine. And it's so smooth. When the shifts take place, particularly on the upshifts, you really don't feel any feedback. It's just a very smooth and linear transition through the gears. And even when you downshift, the car does not, you know, make abrupt jerks as you go through those downshifting gearings. So I was very impressed with the way this thing was put together. I mean, this is the 08, so it's the last model of this generation. And I think they pretty much nailed it with this one. And as I've been driving it, I see why. It's a very, very nice ride. The thing that I was really, really impressed with more than anything is how well the thing handles. It's riding on Michelin tires. They're essentially 50 series. And they hold the road really well, but the car is just really well balanced in terms of its ride height, the wheelbase, and just the geometry of the steering. I mean, it holds the road really well. So I've gone through corners in this car much more aggressively than I thought I would. So that was a really nice surprise. But at any rate, I'm going to take it for a drive, take you through the car, tell you about what's really awesome about it. I don't feel like there are any things that stand out to me that take away from the car. It's not the fastest thing, but I think relatively speaking, when you consider that it is a 4-cylinder, and it's pushing out 200 plus horsepower, that's pretty good. Well, anyway, let's go for a ride and to see how it goes. This thing is fully equipped, doesn't have a backup camera. One of the things I was very surprised about is that it doesn't have automatic locking doors once you take off. It's really quiet. The engine doesn't make a ton of noise. I feel like it kind of lulls you into thinking that there's not much happening, particularly the way that the engine builds power. When you take off from like 0 to whatever, it just jumps off the line really nice and quickly. But what's interesting is that if you don't accelerate aggressively from a start, and you kind of just gradually take off, and then you decide, oh, I want to speed up, it kind of misses a little bit. I feel like down in that, that low RPM range, if you're not already giving it gas from takeoff, it kind of needs a little bit more coercion to pick up, and then you're looking at, waiting on the RPMs to build up to get the rest of that momentum going. But I think it works really well once you've, taken off, and then once you're at speeds, the gearing really picks up nicely and pushes you forward. And what I was saying about it kind of lulls you to thinking that nothing's happening. I mean, it's not loud, it's not abrupt, it's not overly aggressive in sound, but you look at the speedometer and you realize that, it's doing way more than you thought it was. And it makes it a fun car to drive as a result of that. So I think you kind of underestimate it at times. What's really interesting is that the new cars, meaning the TLX, which now has kind of become the overarching car for the TSX and the TL. It's now a combined offering of both those cars. So you get the 4-cylinder model, which basically represents this model, or you get the 6-cylinder, which represented the TL, which TL only had a 6-cylinder, this only had a 4-cylinder. Up until the second generation, 2009, they began to put 6 cylinders in the TSX. And I think that's why the evolution of the TLX came into place, because, well, why have two if you can put a V6 in this one? Why have two? It kind of makes sense. But anyway, it was the last run of the TSX before that changed, and now you've got one car that embodies everything you get from two different models. But that 4-cylinder that they use now, it's still the 2.4 liter, and it still puts out roughly the same horsepower. As I mentioned, this was 200 to 201. The new car puts out about 205. It's got a better transmission, obviously, and that's really the key to really getting the most out of the drivetrain. Is if you put the proper transmission in place, you don't really need to up power all the time. You can get different gearing that brings about torque at a different point, or brings out power at a different point. It really helps to maximize what's there. And they've done a good job utilizing that 2.4 power plant across all these models for all these years. It's kind of like Audi in that they've used that 2-liter turbo for so long, and it's been successful for them. So in the same way, this 2.4 liter engine, without even adding more power to it necessarily, has been a really good move for Honda Acura. You can use that engine across its power band more effectively, and you get better efficiency. This car is the same way though. I think I've gotten over 350, almost 400 miles on a full tank of gas. That's pretty darn impressive. And it's a very comfortable car. I love the seats in this car. They're not quite RSX, but they're very good in support of all areas of the seating position. Now this does have the sport mode. What I've noticed on a lot of sport modes, that when you engage sport mode and drive the car normally as an automatic, they don't go through every gear. They typically stop one gear short. So in the MDX we have, it does this where it goes up through, actually I only think that one goes up through 4th before you have to get in there and take it to the next gear and utilize all the gearing. Whereas this one the same way. I think it only goes up to 4th. There's only 5 gears here, which means you have to engage it. And then once you engage it, you're in manual mode. So now you have to shift back up once you take off from a dead stop. So really the only place that sport mode or manual mode is good for you, or sport mode is good, is if you're driving through the city where you don't necessarily need your 5th gear. Because if you're on the freeway, you need the 5th gear. But the sport mode does allow for better shift points. Allows you to get more aggressive acceleration. So it seems kind of little bit contradictory. I kind of would want it on the freeway to be able to shift through every gear without me touching it and get that sporty accelerative nature out of it for passing and merging and all that stuff. But whatever. I mean, it's just another nuance of an older car, right? I mean, it's an 08. So in a newer TS or TLX, you've got the paddle shifters that work in no matter mode you're in, and you get the most out of the transmission that way. So I just downshifted, accelerating, and I'm at criminal speed now. But the downshift did not create any kind of an interference in the smoothness. I didn't feel the transmission shift at all. And again, I have to reiterate, I mean, this is an 08, and it's really impressive that this transmission is doing as well as it is in terms of being smooth and linear. And these cars, again, as I mentioned with the RSX, this engine has a timing chain, not a belt. So the longevity of the engine is pretty much stated. So that makes it more appealing no matter what the mileage is. I've looked online to see what these things are fetching, and I was kind of shocked to see that cars with over 130,000 miles are still going for $8,000 or more. It was just like, wow, that's strong. But when you've got such a bulletproof setup, specifically the engine with a timing chain, you know, that just makes it an easy pill to swallow if you're looking to fork out money for one, because it is a fun car. But as I was saying, this car was, you know, meant for, you know, just an everyday driver car, but with just a little bit more quality and a slight bit of premiumness to it over a Honda product. But it really got good following from those who just like high revving, decent horsepower Honda cars, myself included. I just think overall the styling of this car is fantastic. The dual exhaust, the wedge shape, it's one of the best shapes and designs that Acura ever produced. Low ride height, and it's not low ride height in that you're bottoming out, but it's just got a very low stance profile specifically. Just makes it look really cool going down the road. I've seen them with, you know, custom wheels, and you know, I thought about doing that. I thought about adding some wheels to it to just make it look that much different, but you know what, I decided just stick with it as stock. But I think, you know, the Acura did a good job. I mean, it's a great looking vehicle as is. Doesn't really need much more, but very impressed with it. Just a great car. So all right guys, well, thanks for watching. Stay tuned, and peace. All-wheel drive.